welcome. Congratulations on the new role.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a busy morning so far.
Yeah, I can imagine you've probably been pinged relentlessly by well-wishers and colleagues and all sorts. Can you just give us a quick intro, who you are, and for those who haven't heard or seen, what's the big news that we're going to talk about today?
So I'm delighted to be joining SpeedInvest as a full partner. I'm going to be leading their Deeptech investing. My whole career has really been in this space. I used to be a founder, so I was built a very early AI platform using remote sensing and drones and robots. And since then, I've been investing at First Minute and Lightspeed, and I'm pretty active across the whole space. So really, really excited about the next chapter.
And what excited you specifically about SpeedInvest?
I think, look, they're a brand on the up. Amazing leadership from Oliver and the other partners, and have a really clear vision how to win in Europe. And the combination of that and having a deep tech team with its own allocation and people that just talk about compute or space was too good an opportunity to say no to. That said, I was so happy at my last two places. I'm sad to leave them as well.
And can you touch a bit more on what your role is going to look like at SpeedInvest? You mentioned that you're going to be a partner there, deep tech focused, but is there a specific stage that you're looking for, specific vertical, specific check size? Any more detail that you can give there?
So most of the day job is trying to find the next pioneers who are trying to build in sectors like robotics, defense, climate. They have their own healthcare team, but it's very close to that as well. Future of AI and space, and these are generally first or second time founders, really strong technical people. Maybe they spun out of ETH or CDTM, and they're trying to solve the biggest problems in Europe or globally today. So I'm trying to find the next SpaceX or the next Tesla. And then the other half of my job is bringing a little bit of my multi-stage background to the growth team, where I'll be operating on a more generalist basis post Series B. So really excited about both.
Got it. So two buckets, I guess: early stage, deep tech, finding those very technical founders and kind of giving them the capital to get things up and running, and then also working later stage growth, but more generalist. On that first bucket, how are you, and you've been investing in this space for some time, but how do you go about finding and sourcing those highly technical teams who have the ability to build hardware deep tech?
So I think with someone like SpeedInvest, they've got a big presence across Europe and pretty high NPS score with their founders, a bit like with First Minute. And to that extent, you've got to be open for business all the time, right? And very reactive. Like getting your head around foundational models in robotics is not that straightforward. So you've got to have a thesis at the same time. So it's no good if you meet the next Black Forest Labs or the next Lovable or the next Mistral, unless you've been thinking quite intentionally about what that whole space is going to do. And then finally, I always have a hot list. My sort of 5 to 10 founders I'd back at any price and whatever they were doing. And sometimes they're running businesses right now, and sometimes they're in places like Palantir waiting to leave. And I think ultimately it's all about the people at Seed. So
interesting. You've already kind of got a network of people that you're ready to back as soon as they take that leap.
Yes, and hopefully it's a good idea as well. I think it's very different then to Series B, where you have a lot more data points, and but in my area in deep tech, right, we know that deep tech companies and non-deep tech companies hit 100 million of ARR at the same moment, but we also know that they're very much behind at Series A and B, which is also when they're the most capital intensive. So deep tech investing at growth is not for the faint-hearted, and it's potentially where the biggest gap lies in Europe, and perhaps the biggest opportunity as well.
And you think that that's where the gap is, or that's where the problem is, because at that point, those companies haven't seen the traction yet that software companies normally have?
That's true. And then simultaneously, the what I call the venture ecosystem at growth for those type of deals is still very young. Europe is much younger than the US, particularly in deep tech terms. If you think of a lot of the very big European winners like Spotify and Revolut have been shallower tech winners. In the US, you do have the Teslas and so forth that like just helps the ecosystem along a bit. That said, there's an absolute, march of companies coming through the ranks, and I'm in no doubt we're going to have a handful of 100 billion plus deep tech European champions in short order.
And where do you see those companies who are kind of on that growth trajectory already? Where do you see them getting their growth capital from? Are they having to look at the US currently, or do you think we're going to be able to plug that hole in Europe?
It's a great question, and I think it's hard because, look, I work for a US fund, right? So I'm naturally biased towards my ex-colleagues and their ability to help people scale really quickly. So I think, to some extent, if you're like a really good top percentile European business like 11 Labs, you're going to have, Andreessen and Sequoia and NEA and all those guys all over you very early. So I think that the ecosystems are fluid enough to have both. I think maybe it's the less obvious top decile ones that haven't had very many data points that where the biggest gap lies. If that makes sense.
Got it. Yeah. Speak to the lack of growth stage capital across Europe is a problem that we hear time and time and again from different people, from founders, from VCs across Europe. And I think it's especially true in deep tech. But I wanted to go back in time a little bit and talk about your business, your first, your foray into entrepreneurship. Can you touch a little bit more on the business that you built, why you decided to build that business at that time, and how that shaped your journey and your approach to VC?
I had an interesting time in my late 20s. I had been working at a hedge fund, was a little bit burnt out from finance. I then had cancer very badly for a couple of years, and I was sitting on my back in hospital thinking, I've just got to go out and swing the bat. And a little bit like an MRI scan looking at disease in my body at the time, Hummingbird, the company I built, originally it was, how do we use drones and robots and high-res imagery and early ML to see disease in plants so that farmers don't put as many chemicals into the food chain as they currently are. And I grew up, my mum gives lectures on plants, and I'm passionate about the food sector. And it was a confluence of all of these sort of either tragedies or passions that were happening in my life. I then scaled that business. We got to sort of roughly Series B, and we slightly ran out of steam, and it ended up being a soft landing exit. And we got lots of things right and lots of things wrong. We were also just very early. I mean, there were literally 3 AI companies, or now AI companies in London at the time. It was kind of Benevolent, DeepMind, and someone else who doesn't exist now. So it was just early, but what a ride. Yeah,
no, of course. It sounds like your background must have played such a big role in kind of taking that leap. One of the questions I wanted to ask is that now that you've seen AI and the industry develop and come to fruition, and the models get so much better, and the technology overall gets so much better, do you have any wishes to take another swing at the bat? Do you ever wish you were still in the arena?
This is this next challenge is a big step up for me, and it constitutes a nudge of the bat. I don't want to be another one of these VCs that likes to sort of refer to themselves as a founder within a VC fund, but it's genuinely entrepreneurial. So that's number one. Number two is I also feel like deeply privileged to be right on the front line of what's happening. And colleagues of mine at First Minute were early investors into Wave and NAN, and colleagues of mine at Lightspeed were early investors into Helsing and Mistral, and like leaning in and working with those founders, you are very much like, you know, a little bit behind the surfer on the wave, and that's good enough for me right now. But thirdly, I think you're right. It's funny in life. Timing is kind of seems to be the biggest vector in all of these things. And I remember chatting to Flo at Quantum Systems, who also co-founded Stark, and you know, we were big customers of theirs in Ukraine, buying drones to fly over farmland in 2017, which is kind of wild to think that if we'd just become like a drone company in defense, you know, I'd probably be dialing into this call from my Learjet.
Yeah, amazing. That's how different things could have turned out. And you've spoken a lot about the lack of entrepreneurs or exited founders in VC and European VC. Why do you think that this is? Why do you think it's important to have ex-founders become VCs, or more? Why is it important that VCs have that founder experience?
So I think it's key for empathy and just having some kind of operational right to have a view. Knowing what it's like when you face an existential funding round, you know, not being able to meet payroll and going through the pain of the 0 to 1 on the product side from the inside. These are like absolute bread and butter things that every VC fund should deeply understand. It doesn't mean that everyone has to have been an ex-founder, right? Because it's just the DNA. I think it rubs off. I think it's healthy. I think it builds a stronger ecosystem. I thought long and hard about why Europe's behind here. And a friend of mine pointed out the other day, it's because finance is so strong. Like, so much talent, particularly like graduate talent, is still being leaked to the Goldmans and the JP Morgans and the Citadels and stuff. And they have very big presence in Europe. And I think that's one reason, but it is getting better. And we saw that when, you know, companies like Google and Meta tended to then be the most popular place to work. And indeed that ecosystem is rich and filtering down already. Yeah.
And it's definitely when I speak to people who are, looking to graduate soon or graduate in the next few years, those institutions no longer hold the same appeal as they once did. And you're right, there's a lot more excitement about tech, about startups, whether it's big tech, growth tech. So I do think it's changing. Yeah, and I think it's something that we hear a lot. You know, I had Dan Barrow, the partner of Superseed, said the same thing. He being an ex-founder. We had Eric, the CEO of Encore, talking about the exact same thing, and he talked about it from the risk perspective. And he said that VCs who haven't taken that swing, like you said, have a slightly different approach to both speed and risk. Do you think that's true?
I think it is. I think it must be true. What's going to really interest me? So I've noticed quite a few talented associate principal sort of level VCs recently go and become operators. This has always happened. It's a sort of, you know, principal at X joins this unicorn as chief of staff. I think it's happening more, and I kind of wonder in my mind, is that a general consequence of venture funds becoming leaner through AI native kind of process, and therefore maybe a bit more top heavy because they can be a bit more top heavy because they've got the tools? Or is it a sort of ecosystem is waking up, like actually the operator experience is so valuable that we need to go and do it? I think the jury's out.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard that perspective before. It's that route to partner in the VC model is almost a bit misleading, because when you compare it to something like a partnership in accountancy or a partnership in a law firm, the ladder is very, very clear. You rise that ladder, you do your time, you get from analyst to associate, and you get to partner. And it does feel like that partnership model in VC is changing or breaking, and that it's definitely, as we move to more entrepreneurs coming in, I think it's going to become harder and harder for career VCs to rise through the ranks.
I think so. And what's the Collinson brothers at Stripe always talk about this? You know, the most valuable thing you can do in your 20s is to know what good looks like. I've been super lucky in my career to have had that. And I think it's the same. Like if you imagine you're 26 now and you work for OpenAI, I mean, you've probably done pretty well, but like, I think, you know, a hotshot mid-20s, mid-level product person at Anthropic has probably got a way shorter path to being a partner of a fund in the Valley now than anyone else, I think.
Yeah. It's really interesting, and yeah. Would that be the advice that you would give to young people who are interested in VC? Like, try and join the most exciting, maybe scale up that they can find?
I think for me, this is very personal and doesn't reflect, it doesn't reflect like my kind of current or former colleagues, all of them. You know, I can't speak for everyone else. I think it's a great mix of person to have across a fund, you know, like someone that's been recently in a sort of scale up rocket ship. I also think that there are some amazing, you know, career VCs, and just through their own experience, I mean, they've worked with so many companies and they've got so much pattern recognition, and they've done, I don't know, like 50 Series A rounds for their companies. That's also as invaluable. It's all, you know, it's all always about diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been building and investing in deep tech for a long time, right? It's specifically across the European continent. What's your kind of take on the overall state of deep tech investing? Do you think money's being allocated into the right places? Do you think there's a real opportunity for Europe to kind of build resilience or build independence when it comes to deep tech? We'd love to get your views on it.
I think it's a timely question. I think it's been really strong, right? And that's reflected in it now being a hot space. But I think you look at European deep tech, the tens of billions that have gone into it in recent years have proven to be resilient with like good exits. And, you know, I don't think the failure rate is any higher than, let's say, in SaaS. So we've debunked a lot of the myths. I think the thing that abides is that you do need a lot more capital. So that's the kind of the delta. I'm very, very bullish, and like Europe has, if you look at something like defense, there's like an amazing opportunity for European defense companies now to go out and build very big businesses and quickly. You know, we know about the peace dividend and defense as a percentage of GDP going quite quickly up to 5%. If you think that, you know, 75% of all kills in Ukraine, sadly, are now UAV derived or autonomous system derived, that was like zero a few years ago. So the way to think about TAM is not 3% of GDP to 5%. It's like 0 to 75%, and in a growing market. So for me, that's an immense generational opportunity. And we're going to see massive companies. You know, we're going to see a European SpaceX. We're going to see huge UAV companies like Helsing and Stark and others. We're going to see a whole robotics layer. I'm very, very, very excited about different pockets within European deep tech.
Yeah, and to touch on some of those verticals or categories, you've said that some of the things that you're most excited about are the multi-bucket opportunities. You know, the ones that don't necessarily sit in solely robotics or solely defense. Can you touch on what you mean by that and give perhaps some examples?
Yes. So with that comment, I was sort of thinking of companies like Tesla and Palantir. So they're over a decade old, but the interesting thing there is that they sit across, in Palantir's case, gov, health, defense, AI, and they have these products, Foundry, that are really platforms for an entire deep tech ecosystem. And when you blur those sector bucket lines, you can build these generationally big companies. I think as well, I saw, you know, Jeanette and Robin at GC said this the other day, like founders need to build platforms, not just products. So you think about what companies like Lovable and Celonis and Helsing are doing. They're building platforms for the entire ecosystem, right? And that will take them outside of their initial sort of MVP zone. That's what gets me. That sort of type of ambition is kind of what I'm looking for when I filter for founders that I want to back.
Yeah, so not just dominant players in a vertical, but broad platform ecosystem players that can serve lots of different verticals.
Correct. And, whilst deep tech requires more money, don't forget that it also builds a moat. So if you combine massive ambition, huge underlying market, and then dollars towards a moat, it's, you can maybe, hit new highs, which is kind of what it's all about.
And do you see more investors moving towards deep tech? We're seeing a lot of these changes, a lot of this demand, as you say, in defense and energy and European resilience. Do you see other VCs who have typically been SaaS players moving into deep tech?
I think it's a natural consequence of deep tech making up, let's say, roughly a third of the whole, let's say, venture ecosystem now. And there having been some great winners. And maybe, at what point do the foundational models make some of what we considered enterprise SaaS investing unattractive or smaller or capped as an outcome? I think a lot of these, I think it's a lot of different dynamics at play. But for me, I love it, seeing the investors into Proxima Fusion, right? We had a lot of non-typical deep tech money into that. A lot of people piled into Mistral that didn't normally make foundational bets. And I think that's only a good thing. I'm joining a fund in SpeedInvest that have been doing it for years before it was cool. So, I'm just a small chapter in their journey.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It is kind of like a necessary movement as kind of the global venture scene changes. You've also said that you think governments should become kind of active backers of new technology. Can you elaborate a bit more on how European governments across the continent can do that and to kind of encourage deep tech across Europe?
You take a step back and think, how big is the US defense budget? It's like broadly $1 trillion. However way you calculate it, you get there or thereabouts. Now, why has the US government or the DoD been so pivotal in creating that ecosystem? Well, they give billion-dollar type contracts to people like Andrew, and SpaceX received 10 billion plus of government grants. And I think that instead of sitting back economically and then being very aggressive on stuff like regulation and red tape, the government just needs to consider itself like a great procurement partner. And whether we're talking about the next generation of semiconductors that will take, it will take a lot of money to get them to tape out. If you're doing optical compute, it does require money and partnerships. And I think the government has a key role in that. It can't just whinge about sovereignty without putting its foot forward.
Yeah, without adopting it itself, I guess, and being willing to take that risk and put its money where its mouth is. Conscious we're running out of time, I wanted to finish on some very quick fire questions, not so related to tech entrepreneurship, but to kind of get to know you a bit better. You've mentioned you like rooftop gardening. Favorite thing to grow?
Well, I'll tell you what, the only thing that seems to have worked on my roof has been carrots, which doesn't really make sense, but we all love a carrot.
Well, that's good. At least you've got something, I guess. In green to sports, who's your favorite, most inspirational athlete?
It's got to be Gaza, Paul Gascoigne. He was like Leonardo da Vinci on the pitch, and amusing at times off pitch, but maybe not as prolific.
You've got a daughter. Favorite thing, hardest thing about becoming a parent?
Gosh, I mean, I know nothing thanks to my wife. I now know a little bit, but waking her up in the morning is like the best part of the day. She's so smiley, 7 a.m. And it's becoming harder and harder to leave her. But I travel a lot for work, but very, very happy to have her.
Amazing. And final question, biggest investor regret? Is there any opportunity to invest in a company that you passed on and you kind of lie awake at night thinking about?
Do you know what? I didn't see it, which is probably a mistake as well. But Matty and 11 Labs, I love them as a business. I've always been a multimodal AI guy. So, voice to text, sound as AI is just right up my street. And he's a great founder. So like that's one. I also owned Tesla super early, very big position, and then sold it. I mean, what an idiot. So we're talking 13, 14 years ago. So I think you can make a mistake after having got something right, which is probably as important.
Selling too early, yeah. On the investor forums and Reddit, everyone always says you just got to hold and hold and hold. But Will, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on the new role. And any time that SpeedInvest or yourself has got something to talk about, you've got founders that you want to come on the show and give them an opportunity to talk about what they're building, just let me know.
100%, Seb. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Let's speak soon.